And the final update is concerning the Zimbabwe State of the Nation address and the power trip over there. And I just saw this actually quite recently, and thankfully I did not release an episode this week or earlier than that. Otherwise, I would have just missed this. And I just wanted to get into this article. Now, what happened is the president of Zimbabwe, after having extended his terms of power, meaning that he extended his actual terms of service or the lengths of service, because I think in Zimbabwe you should only be president for about 4 years, or I don't know if it's every 4 or 5 years as far as the elections. I think it's 4. And what he then did was extend his term to 2030, from what I heard. And of course, this is completely unparliamentary and is unconstitutional, I should also say. But of course, we had somebody, his predecessor, with his Robert Mugabe, of course, having been president until a few years before he died. Ultimately, they actually had to have a whole military coup to get him out the office. And he was the one who actually spearheaded himself in this Emmerson Mnangagwa, which is the president of Zimbabwe. Now, why am I covering this? If you remember my prophecy that I was given about Zimbabwe, about the fact that God was going to cut off Zimbabwe's dependence on South Africa. And the symbolism that he's going to use was the fact that the Eskom and ZESA, meaning that Eskom, which is the power generation company or parastatal in South Africa, was going to stop supplying electricity to the Zimbabwean electricity company called ZESA or ZESA. So that was the two power parastatals, or the two power generation sort of companies in their respective nations, will stop having that interdependency, and mainly being South Africa supplying all the electricity to Zimbabwe. Now, what we saw in the State of the Nation was the fact that when the president was deliberating the State of the Nation address, 10 minutes into it, it was in complete darkness. So in the article, it says there that the actual loss of power supply to key systems occurred when the Parliament building was running on a generator as the main source of supply, with Zimbabwe Electricity Supply Authority, which is ZESA, power as a standby. So in other words, and I'm sorry that I butchered the old reading, I was just saying there that they had a generator running, and the only thing that was supposed to be on standby was the main electricity. Isn't that a little bit of like doing things backwards? So it went on to say, as far as the quotation and the citation of it, it says, when supplies were lost, the generator was still running, but not supplying power, he said. Then further on, preliminary investigations indicate that a circuit breaker supplying the load had tripped. The restoration took longer than expected, resulting in part of the SONA being delivered without power. However, Speaker of Parliament Jacob Mudenda suspected foul play. We will go beyond what happened and trace the culprits and deal with them accordingly. Those that will be found wanting to regret the day of their existence, Mudenda told Parliament. The matter has generated jokes on social media. Right. I'm not going to read the whole article. It's on the Mail and Guardian. Thank you for that. But quite essentially, look at that. Like, they took it as foul play. And God, being quite the clever wordmaster or wordsmith that he is, notice this, that as this president illegitimately and illegally extended his own terms of power, God then retracted and rescinded any source of power coming in from the neighboring nation of South Africa, where I am from, where I hail from. So anyone notice that? Isn't that quite clever? Like, as far as that prophecy that God gave me, and I'll put the link there in the description box so people can actually see that I'm not making this stuff up. I already saw something of the sort happening. That, of course, people know that, look, it doesn't take any prophecy to know that the electricity situation is quite dire. Now, the main thing one must realize something about Zimbabwe and their generation and as far as their generational capacity, that the main source of generation and the main source of electricity comes from hydropower, which is in Lake Kariba. And that's where the hydro sort of electricity, meaning the main source of that, is God having to supply the rains. And of course, we all know, and something I've stated here, there's no such thing as this whole climate change or any of that sort. It's all God strategically knowing what he's doing. So when he's going to dry that up, they're going to have to draw the electricity from coal generation, which primarily comes from South Africa. And that, at the moment, is coming at quite a premium and becoming a scarcity in its own self. So Zimbabwe is going to be coming for quite a headache. And further on, and I just want to say this to people as to that particular prophecy, that God was saying that the reason why he removed that dependency from Zimbabwe on Zimbabwe's dependency on South Africa, I should say, sorry for my bad phrasing, is the fact that Zimbabwe will have to face its own fate and will not share in South Africa's destiny. Now, understand that there's a difference between destiny and fate. So why would God use the word fate as far as Zimbabwe? And I've already described here on my channel as far as the plans God has conveyed concerning South Africa and the rebuilding thereof it. And I also had another prophecy concerning Zimbabwe, where all the white people were evacuating and leaving Zimbabwe and have to leave and most of them are going to be flocking to South Africa and even some other regions out in SADC. And it includes the commercial business. People have seen that that's a fairly recent one as far as the prophecies are concerned. So you can check that out too. In fact, I've got a playlist there. He hasn't shown me anything as to what ultimately happens to Zimbabwe, up to now, even fairly concerning that. But why does it all seem like evacuate Zimbabwe? And especially that I also noted, I made reference to the fact that, listen, the white people fleeing doesn't mean that they're not going to be other. We know that there are other people in Zimbabwe leaving Zimbabwe. This is about him drawing what's his and enjoying the white people, and I'm saying white people who are flocking away from Zimbabwe and having to live in South Africa and other places. That is a sign that he is going to be scattering those who belong to him. And I don't know what's going to happen to those that belong. I'm not saying everybody has to go necessarily, but I don't know what's really going to happen, especially that he used the word fate. Fate has got harsh sort of outcomes as compared to what is denoted with destiny and destined sort of outcomes, or just like predestination. We've seen that sort of thing. That says hope. And the other one is devoid of hope. And that's just about, damnation and perhaps curse. Who knows? I haven't got anything yet. God still shares something with me on the day. And he'll let me know. He might share it with somebody else. He might never share it with me. I don't know. I have no control over that. Anyway, I just had to bring you that one. Particularly quite a, God has quite a, weird sense of sort of expressions in terms of how he brings about certain meanings and how he has certain symbolisms and how he puts certain things together to bring out an desired outcome. Quite interesting that how when just on the eve that this president decides to illegitimately extend his power or what he thinks is power, God has a preemptive strike in this electricity situation that will render him powerless to do anything and escape the wrath of God. Please, guys, if you're in Zimbabwe, pray God gives you direction as what you need to do and where you need to be by the time he's dealt with this wicked ZANU-PF that has always been, and I explain that in a particular prophecy, has been aided by the African National Congress, or the ANC. They're the ones that actually have been low-key enabling this wicked government here we see in Zimbabwe. Anyway, those are the end of these updates.